Good morning. Welcome everyone back after our spring break to our study of the divided kingdom of Judah and Israel. We're in 1st and 2nd Kings for this study, and today we're moving fully into the 2nd Kings portion. So last lesson was a while ago now that we've taken off for spring break, but does anyone remember what we covered? It was the last chapter of 1st Kings, the first chapter of 2nd Kings. What did we talk about?
We talked about Jehoshaphat trying to echo Solomon's reign. And this is the southern kingdom of Israel, and Jehoshaphat, who's the son of Asa. And he was trying to be a good guy.
Yeah, very good. Good summary. So we had been in all these stories of Elijah, right? And that takes place in the northern kingdom. Now there's interaction with the southern kingdom because Ahab interacts with Jehoshaphat in some of their battles, but the narrative has been in Israel, in the northern kingdom of Israel for all of this time. And then so much so that it refers to Jehoshaphat before we've even formally met Jehoshaphat. So the narrative takes us a pause and it goes back in and checks in with the southern kingdom of Judah. We hear about Jehoshaphat, we hear about his reign, we see him try to do the right thing, but he doesn't do the right thing all the way. And so when he tries to be like Solomon, some of that kind of falls apart. And then we go back to the northern kingdom and we hear about Ahaziah. Ahaziah is the son of Ahab. He's the first son of Ahab to be king in the northern kingdom of Israel, or in their capital city of Samaria. And we see when we catch up with him in 2nd Kings, we see he's been injured. And who has he been consulting about his injury? Who does he want to consult? He doesn't actually successfully do so.
Beelzebub.
Right. He's going to send a messenger to this permutation of the god Baal, right? So this tells us that this theme of the war God is waging against Baal worship in order to pursue the devotion of his people is going to continue as we continue the story in the northern kingdom, right? The campaign against Baal worship is ongoing. Did any other questions or comments from last week?
Well, it's just sad to me that all those soldiers got killed twice.
Oh, when Elijah calls down fire from heaven.
Yeah, it's just kind of sad. You know, there's moms and dads and everything. Anyway, just
yeah, and you know, the themes of these stories, and I think this is partly because this is written looking back over the scope of history, right? And so we don't see the sorrow for the individual soldiers. Instead, we see what happens when people disrespect God by disrespecting the prophet of God, right? Because in the time this is written, all those people would be dead even if they were dead of natural causes, right? Like when you're looking back at history and you're talking about the battles, as you look at the sweep of history, you don't see those individual moments, right? And the individual stories and the tragedies and the problems of the people. And those soldiers suffered from the disrespect that their commanders chose to show, right? Yeah, great point. I think all that matters to scripture, but as we're looking at the sweep of history, we don't always see every little part of that come out. Yeah. Other questions or comments? We have a repeat in a different form of that story again today, and it's equally sad or possibly sadder. I don't know which. Yeah. All right, well, let's read 2 Kings 2, 1 through 18. Lael, if you want to read that for us, please.
After Ahab's death, Moab rebelled against Israel. Now Ahaziah had fallen through the lattice of his upper room in Samaria and injured himself. So he sent messengers saying to them,
Let me have you
consult Beelzebub, the god
well,
of Ekron, to see if I will recover from this injury. But the angel of the Lord said to Elijah the Tishbite, go up and meet.
Lael, could I interrupt you briefly? Let's move to chapter 2, starting in verse 1. I know I sent you that. You have to unmute. I'm sorry, I was like trying to get your attention.
Oh, okay, sure. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel. But Elisha said, as surely as the Lord lives, as you live, I will not leave you. So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today? Yes, I know, Elisha replied, so be quiet. Then Elijah said to him, stay here, Elisha, the Lord has sent me to Jericho. And he replied, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you. So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today? Yes, I know, he replied, so be quiet. Then Elijah said to him, stay here, the Lord has sent me to Jordan. And he replied, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you. So the two of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you? Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit, Elisha replied. You have asked a difficult thing, Elijah said. Yet if you see me where I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two. Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and struck the water with it. Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? He asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left and crossed over. The company of the prophets from Jericho who were watching said, the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha. And they went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. Look, they said, we, your servants, have 50 able men. Let them go and look for your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has picked him up and set him down on some mountain or in some valley. No, Elisha replied, do not send them. But they persisted until he was too embarrassed to refuse. So he said, send them. And they sent 50 men who searched for 3 days, but could not find him. When they returned to Elisha, who was staying in Jericho, he said to them, didn't I tell you not to go?
Thank you. Okay, so what is happening in this section? What's the overarching, like, what's going on?
A question first, Deanna.
Yes.
How did they all know that Elijah was going to be gone?
Very interesting question, right? Like, all right, so,
Because everybody they met already knew.
yeah, okay. What kind of people already knew?
Sons
Not
of prophets.
sons of prophets, right? So there is a sense that the prophetic community has enough vision to see that this is the time. And this, your NIV will say, is going to take your master from you. More literally, it is from over you. So take your master from over you. So he's the situation, they're saying like something's going to happen so that Elisha is no longer reporting to Elijah. They know in part, right? They have because they're prophets, they have some vision into what's going to happen, and it's that somehow Elijah is going to be removed from this role today. Yeah. And I think it's so funny how he says, yes, I know, be quiet. Yes, I know, be still, right? Like it's the same phrase, depending on how you translate it, but it's that same phrase over and over. Yeah. Someone else was going to say something. What's going on? What's the progression in this narrative? Like what kind of narrative is it?
Elisha.
What'd you say, Ann?
I was just going to say it's the transfer from Elijah to Elisha. Elisha's he's got the new mantle.
Right, it's a succession narrative,
Yeah.
right? Which would be a traditional narrative that we would see in what position? Who has succession narratives?
Kings.
Kings, yes. So this is like a little bit of a surprise, right? That that we're going to get a succession for the prophets, because the prophets aren't usually a dynasty, right? But it ties back to 1 Kings 19:16. That was when Elijah was on Mount Horeb. Remember, he had fled to the mountain of God, and God told him, you're going to anoint Elisha as your successor. Okay, so we knew from way back that Elijah was going to have a successor, and it was going to be Elisha. And now we get the culmination of that in this succession narrative. And what kind of echo from Israel's history are we getting? Verse 8, what does Elijah do in verse 8?
He took his cloak and he struck it up with water.
Yeah, and what happened to the water?
It's separated.
It divided from right to left.
Like
The Red Sea.
like Moses, like the Red Sea, right? So just as Moses, and who was Moses' successor?
Aaron?
Aaron was his brother and the priest.
Know that. Joshua.
Joshua.
Right, you guys have it right. So, and actually you remember that in Hebrew, or you may not remember, the sound that we pronounce as a J is a Y. It's a what we would call a Y sound in Hebrew. So it's Yeshua and Elisha. These are very similar names. So we get even an echo of the names between Yeshua and Elisha here. So we've got this like clear sort of imitation or echo of the Mosaic narrative, right? Why would we want to call up the Mosaic narrative?
That God is with him.
Yeah, it's a leader who is, remember, Moses was a friend of God. He was their leader. He's also a prophet. It talks about Moses as a prophet. And so the God continues to lead his people Israel through prophetic works. Yeah. Other thoughts or comments on that?
Why does Elijah not want Elijah to be with him? He keeps saying that, It's
right.
So, I'm trying to get away from you.
He's like, you stay here. You stay here. Yeah. So why do y'all think that? What's going on with that?
Is it a test?
Okay, so I think you're right. Let's look at verse 1. It says, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Okay, well, how would the reader know that's about to happen? The author is assuming kind of the knowledge of this event as he introduces this chapter, right? He refers to it very matter-of-factly. It's like everyone knows, just from our history, that Elijah was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. So he refers to it like we know it from the beginning. And I think, and so the later event is like read back in through the whole chapter, right? I think that's what's going on with the you stay here and I'll go on, you stay here and I'll go on thing. Look at verse 10. So let's look at the whole thing. So verse 9, what does Elisha ask of Elijah?
A double portion
Right, what does that mean?
of his spirit. That's the same thing that a first son gets. He gets
Yes.
twice the inheritance.
Yeah, so he is asking to be the main inheritor. He's asking to be the son and the heir, to carry on what the work of Elijah, right? What is the work of Elijah? Prophet. Yeah. In what way? In what situation is Elijah having to prophesy into?
To the kings.
Yeah, a really tricky political situation with the kings, right? What's the problem with the kings?
They keep wanting to kill him.
Why? Yeah, why do they want to kill him?
They don't like the message.
They don't, because what is their problem, right? They don't like the message because they are at odds with God, right? What is their problem?
Disobedience.
Right, this disobedience, idolatry, with the calves, with Baal. And so Elijah's work is to speak into this situation where God is at war with Baal worship, with idol worship, with like in a battle for the hearts and minds of the people of Israel, right? And because of that, Elijah's work is hard, and he's constantly at odds with these king, and they're sending commanders to capture him. And, you know, he's running for his life when Jezebel says she's going to slaughter him. And, you know, so he has this really specific work, and that is what Elisha will be taking on, right? He will be taking on the mantle, right? You've heard taking on the mantle. That's an expression we use in English, and you notice here it's literally the mantle. Some of your translations may say cloak, but others will say mantle of Elijah. Like he will carry on as the heir, right? The double portion of the spirit is to be the heir, to inherit the work that Elijah has been doing for God. What is verse 10? What does Elijah respond?
He said, it's difficult, but here's how you will know if you have it. If you see me when I'm taken, then you have it. And if you don't see me when I'm taken, you don't have it.
Right. So if we take that, if you see me when I'm taken, you will get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we take that and we read it back in to you stay here, I'm going to go on. You stay here, I'm going to go on, right? Then that's how we get this idea of a test, right? That you mentioned. That's how we understand, like, oh, this is to see if Elisha has the commitment, if he has the willingness to follow into, right, this difficult, right? This is difficult, into this difficult role that Elijah has filled in the work of God. His role has not been easy, and it has taken its toll on him at various times.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts or comments on that?
How did Elijah get in such a prominent position? You remember in Jesus' day, remember the transfiguration, Elijah was on that mount. And the people would, at the crucifixion, say, let's wait and see if Elijah comes and helps him.
Yeah.
And they talk about the great prophet, and they're talking about Elijah. I just wonder how was it that he got such a reputation and such, to be in that position. If Elisha got his portion, how come it stayed with Elijah, the reputation and all that? I just wonder about that sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Elijah is like the quintessential, the prophet for the people of Israel. Like, if I were going to pick, I might say Isaiah, like he's got the longest book, right? Or
Yeah.
Elisha has the double portion. Yeah, but it is, and we think about it in the scope of this history, right? The book of Kings, we talked about how First Kings and Second Kings are a continuous Hebrew book divided by scroll length, right? So that the end of one and the beginning of another is just what we see on so many other kings, where you get a summary of the reign and then you get the stories of the reign. And so like we get the summary of the reign at the end of First Kings and then the stories of the reign at the beginning of Second Kings. It's a continuous story. So if we look at that whole story, then we see like the pause. We talked about that, the pattern that God had established of bringing raising up a king, but when he doesn't follow God, bringing his son down and raising up another, raising up a king, bringing his son down, raising up another, and then God breaks the pattern and we get this intense prophetic time, right? And so I think what we're seeing is the whole center of the history of Israel is focused on God's pursuit of the people, and he uses Elijah to do that. I think Elijah continues to represent, even for Jews today who leave the door open for Elijah and the story of the Passover, right? Like the figure of Elijah continues to represent God's pursuit of his people as they stray.
Mhm.
And it's curious that it's Elijah specifically and not, I think there's some
Yeah.
mystery there, and yet we can kind of see it.
Mhm.
Questions or comments? So Elisha was running, he was taking his test all day before he knew he was taking his test, right? Before he got the if then statement later, we can see as we can look back through and read that story back into all day, we see that his test was ongoing before he knew he was taking it. And isn't that the way our lives work so often, right? That we have to follow God. We have to continue to stay with him and pursue before we even know that a test is in progress. And so Elisha is doing that. He is following. He is dedicated. He wants to be with his master. He wants to learn. He wants to follow God. And so he continues to follow. And in verse 12, what does Elisha see? What happens?
Sees the chariots and the horsemen of Israel.
Yeah, what a powerful exclamation. Doesn't that stick with us? Yes. He says, we really kind of have a theme statement for this succession here in what Elisha cries out. What's the first part?
He says, my father, my father.
My father, right? It is his mentor. It is the one he is to inherit for. It's the person teaching him the ways of the Lord, my father, my father. And so we get the sense of the inheritance coming through. And then it's the chariots and horsemen of Israel, right? What do they represent? What's the symbolism there? What do chariots and horsemen usually represent?
King.
A king in, what'd you say, Linda?
I just said kings. They represent power
Power
in war.
in war, right? This is battle. These are battle implements, right? These are the
Mhm.
weapons of wars, the chariots and horsemen. And so we see that Elisha is inheriting what Elijah has done, has represented the battle for Israel, right? And chariots and horsemen continue to appear over and over in the rest of today's narrative, don't they? It's quite a noticeable theme once you begin to look for it. They show up when Naaman shows up, he shows up with Aramean chariots. When the Arameans are camped out in the siege around Samaria, they think they hear chariots and horsemen, and we may infer that maybe God is sending them the sound of his chariots and horsemen of Israel. And because of that, they think, oh, it's the Egyptians and the Hittites, and they flee and leave the camp abandoned. And that's how God rescues Samaria from that siege. And so we're going to see those chariots and horsemen show up several times. So there's chariots and horsemen. What else is there? What other elements are part of this event? I don't want to say vision because it's a real event, right?
Fire.
Fire. What else?
Whirlwind.
Fire and wind, right? What do we usually see? We see fire and wind.
Well,
What does that mean?
Moses and the burning bush and the fire that led them,
The fiery cloudy pillar that led them, the burning bush that burns and doesn't burn up. Yes. What else? What about Mount Sinai?
I was gonna say Elijah in the, when he had the fire, I don't know, what God was gonna come.
On Mount Horeb. Yes, exactly. That's right before he got the instructions. Yes, absolutely. Mount Sinai, the fire and billows of smoke. And what do those mean? What do those indicate?
Presence of God.
Presence of God, exactly. This is the theophany. This is the sign of the presence of God. And so God is showing up in person to collect his prophet. And through that, because Elisha is given the gift of seeing it, right? The prophetic gift is a gift of vision, right? A gift of seeing. A prophet is sometimes called a seer because he sees it. The inheritance of this work is passed on to Elijah. So we have that theophany. We see the presence of the Lord. Now, the company of prophets. So what do they see?
they think he's somewhere else and they're going to go looking for him.
Right. They don't really see what happens, do they? They're watching from a distance. They see that there's a whirlwind, but they don't see the truth of what has happened, right? And so they think, well, maybe he's retired. We knew he was going to be taken from over Elisha today, but maybe God set him down on a mountain and we need to go find him and provide for him in his retirement, right? They don't understand what has happened, but they do understand one thing. What happens in verse 13? What does Elisha do? After this? So he first, Elisha does what? Verse 12. Elisha saw him no more than he
Or his cloak.
Right. Why?
Well, because that's distress for one thing. A lot of times they're sad, they tear their clothes, but
Sign
also
of mourning.
A mourning, but then he's got a new cloak. It's the transition.
It's the transition. It's the mourning of the old and the taking on of the new. And so he picks up the cloak that has fallen from Elijah, verse 13, and he went back and he stood on the bank of the Jordan. And what did he do?
Separated it.
Separated
With the cloak, touched it with the cloak.
Right. He does the exact same miracle, right?
Yeah.
And what can the prophet see from that?
That he now has God's blessing.
Right.
That spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha. They can see that.
But
Yeah,
when they request to go look for Elisha, are they really acknowledging Elisha as
it's
the new
interesting,
leader?
right? Like they're
Yeah.
like, but could we find Elijah, right? And so maybe we see that there is further need to authenticate Elisha as the inheritor, as the heir, as the new prophet of the Lord. And so what happens next?
I'm confused
What
as to why they bow down. I thought we weren't supposed to worship people.
I think they bow as you would bow before a king. It's
King.
not necessarily worship, right? But they fall at his feet. We see the widow later falls at his feet, and we perceive that to be, oh no, is that the widow? Actually, I think it's the Shunammite woman,
Yeah.
Mhm.
who I always think of as a widow, but no, she has a husband. So, although her husband is old. So anyway, yeah, like she falls, and we perceive that as in like thanks and awe, right? And so I think that's what is going on here. So Elisha needs to be further authenticated as God's prophet. And so in verse 19, we see the next story. What does Elisha do? There's a town with bad water.
It's like his first miracle.
Right.
He turns the bad water into good water.
Yeah, it's 2 water miracles in a row, right? It's like the first miracle was the parting of the Jordan with Elijah's cloak, and then we get kind of the other corollary to it in the healing of the water, right? The making good of the water, just as Moses like made the water good at some point. The water was bitter, it made it good, so we have that echo. Dia, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say he had a bowl of salt and he threw it into the water.
Yeah. Did the salt fix the water? Was
No.
the problem with the water that it needed salt?
No.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. I saw Judy say, it's a miracle, right? It's a work of God that God fixed the water, and the use of this bowl of salt. Salt was very often used in ritual things, and so it's valuable commodity, and he uses that as like a prop in his miracle where God heals the water. Yeah. And then verse 23, what happens when Elisha goes up to Bethel? He's walking on the road, and what happens?
Hmm.
People are calling him a bald head.
Yeah, we don't really understand why they're calling. Does he happen to be bald? And so it's a way that they can like abuse him and just, be mean to him? Or is it that prophets in that day had a part of their head shaved as part of their mark of prophecy? And scholars debate this. We don't know. But they say, go on up, you bald head, go on up, you bald head. So that we get this sense of like a pack of miscreants, right? There's scoundrel youths who are disrespecting Elisha. And what happens when you disrespect the prophet of the Lord?
Get a curse on you.
Yeah. Yeah, he calls down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. And to what?
And a bear comes and mauls 42 of them.
Right. This is very much like what story?
The lion's mouth,
Would you say, Joyce?
the lion.
Oh, great point. Yes, we have 2 stories in Kings so far where a lion comes out of the woods and mauls a disobedient prophet, right? The prophet that ate and drank when he was supposed to return to his country without eating and drinking, and the prophet that refused to strike the other prophet as part of the scheme to mislead Ahab into pronouncing his judgment on himself for not killing the king that was supposed to be devoted to the Lord, right? So definitely we have an echo there. We have another echo. What is it? Where Elijah had called down a curse and people died.
Are we talking about the 50 soldiers that went each time?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
get it. It's an echo of that story, right? Where the commander comes and is disrespectful to the prophet, and then he calls down fire from heaven and it destroys them. And so we see a couple of parallels, right? These stories are full of echoes. And in a way, if we look at kind of the list of miracles, we get sort of a going like the last few miracles that Elijah did, Elisha goes back and sort of repeats them in reverse order. You see that pattern. It's a sense of authentication here, right? Where like maybe the company of prophets are still looking for Elijah, and it's going to take them, like Linda said, like, are they really respecting Elisha? Are they really acknowledging him? Well, maybe it takes a little more, right? And in fact, if we look through the miracles of each, what we see is there's a sense of repetition and a sense of expansion. What happens? What do we see about the number of miracles that each do?
Elisha does more miracles.
Yeah, and the traditional understanding of this in the Mishnah, I'm going to share my screen briefly, maybe if I can. The traditional way of understanding this, I'm trying to advance. There we go. Is that Elijah has 8 miracles and Elisha has 16. It's double, right? It's like the double portion of the Spirit, right? So we get like Elisha doing this drought, and you see this reversal, right? Parting the waters of the Jordan River is Elisha's last miracle. It's Elijah's last miracle. It's Elisha's first. Destroying these 51 soldiers was his second to last. We have 2 double water miracle, and then we have the bears causing, 2 bears come out, and then we, maybe we're considered authenticated, but the rest, as we look down the list, it's doubled. It's twice as many miracles from Elisha as we get from Elijah.
Deanna?
Yes.
I have a footnote that the boys were from Bethel, which was a center of idolatry.
Yes.
And that would give another reason why these boys were taunting Elisha, because he was going to Bethel to tell them they should not be doing that.
And we get a sense of disrespect for the Lord coming from Bethel, with the guy from Bethel rebuilding Jericho at the cost of his firstborn, at the cost of his secondborn, that idea, like maybe that was a sacrifice. The Bethel has become thoroughly corrupted, and it maybe shows up in the behavior of its youth. Yeah, good point. Any questions before I take this chart away? I don't know, there's just a sort of an interesting, as we look at the whole sweep, we see like that double portion shows up in the double miracles, right? And many of these other stories continue to echo Elijah's miracles, right? What happens in chapter 4 that echoes what Elijah had done?
The widow's a well.
Yeah. So with Elijah, this widow is going to starve, and he says, make me a cake, and the oil doesn't run out and the flour doesn't run out. Right. This one, she needs to pay her creditors, but it's still the ever-flowing oil, right? It's still a widow in need, and it's still the ever-flowing oil, right? And then what about the next part? What happens with the Shunammite woman?
The life of her child.
Yeah, the life of the child.
Saved.
Yeah, so we definitely have these repetitions, echoes, so that what we're seeing is that God is continuing, right? God continues to pursue. He continues to hold power over life and death, right? He continues to be the one in Israel who is the God, is there a God in Israel? Or, when Elisha takes the mantle, he says, where is the God of Elisha? Well, the God of Elijah is the God of Elisha is the God in Israel, right? Same as we get when we get Jehoshaphat saying, is there no prophet of the Lord? And in chapter 1, was there no prophet of God in Israel that you had to go see Baal, right? The themes, they go all the way through, right? As you read all of these stories, we have the death in the pot, the Shunammite son restored, Naaman, right? What themes do you notice as we go through?
Submission.
Yeah,
I mean, Naaman has to submit and go to the river that he doesn't really want to go to because he wants a better outcome.
he does. I think Naaman is really representative of all of the powerful people in these stories, right? They all want to do it their way. The kings always want their way, and it's not the kings who prevail. It's the humble in all of these, isn't it? Where do you see the humble person showing up and well in these stories?
Well, getting all the jars to put the oil in. I mean, as many as she can find, and all her friends helping her out with lots of jars so she'll have enough money to pay off her debts. And
yeah, the debtor, the widow and the debtor. Yes.
The Shunammite woman, created a place for him to stay in her
Yeah.
house.
She just says simple needs. I have a home among my people, but her simple way of respecting the prophet of the Lord is really celebrated, isn't it?
I thought about what also that kind of relating back to Moses, that theme with Moses, that it shows God as the rescuer, the savior of the people.
Yeah. Which I think that's a great lead into our next section we're going to read. But first, say what you were going to say, Sandy.
Oh, I just lost it.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. I was thinking that each one of these believed that they were going to be helped because they followed their directions. So they believed that they were going to get the help.
Yeah. And over, it's a servant that shows that belief, right? The servant girl tells Naaman he should go see the prophet. The servants tell the king, well, we could go talk to the prophet, right? Like it's the humble people, it's the women, it's the Gentile, it's the young and humble that continue to shine in these narratives, continue to be used by the Lord.
And feeding the hundreds.
Oh, yes. What a good one, right? We get Elijah does something. Where is, hold on. I'm on order in my notes, so I was just looking for it. Oh, 442. A man came from Baal Shalishah, bringing the man of God 20 loaves of barley bread baked from the first ripe grain. Okay, so what we're seeing is that this is an offering, right? You take your first few fruits and you give them to the Lord. He's taken the first of his barley grain, and barley is a grain for the poor. It's not the fine flour. Remember in the siege, like the fine flour one is gonna sell for a shekel, but the barley is 2, it's double, right? Because barley is a poorer grain. Barley bread baked from the first ripe grain and some heads of new grain, and he offers it to the man of God, right? To Elisha, to the prophet. And Elisha says, set it before the people, they will eat and have enough. What does that remind us of?
Feeding the 5,000.
Yeah, the feeding that Jesus does on the hillside, in the wilderness, right? There's a sense of the God of provision is showing here what he will do later and how he will continue to provide for his people. Just like Moses in the wilderness with the manna and the quail. Yeah, great point.
I'm struck by how confident Elisha is in all of this. he never seems to be stressed out doing any of
Okay.
this. And I
Why
remember
is that?
I
And let's to keep that, that's such a great comment. Let's keep that in mind while we read
okay.
chapter 6, 8 through 23. Why is Elisha not stressed out? Okay. 8 through 23. Lael, would you read chapter 6, verses 8 through 23?
Yes. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king so that he was on guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, tell me, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel? None of us, my lord the king, said one of the officers, but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Go find out where he is, the king ordered, so that I can send men and capture him. The report came back, he is in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night, surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. As the enemy came down towards him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike this army with blindness. So he struck them with blindness, as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, this is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for. And he led them to Samaria. After they entered the city, Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so that they can see. Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and there they were inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them? Do not kill them, he answered. Would you kill those who had captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink and then go back to their master. So he prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory.
Okay, I chose this section out of, there's so many great stories in this reading. And we could do like a mini series just on Elisha, but we, crammed it all into one lesson because we're looking at that whole sweep across the history of Israel. But I chose this one partly because it's so funny. I think it's really, really funny, and I love it when the Bible does humor. It always does it in a certain understated way, right? So the king, he's like, we have a mole, everybody, we have a mole, right? Who's the mole? It's just like, the plot of every spy thriller we've ever seen. And it's one of the, it's obvious, it's a servant to the king. It's one of his people. The king himself has no ability to see, but one of his people says to him, oh no, this is what's happening. What's been happening?
It's the prophet. God is talking to the prophet.
Right? The man of God reports what you say in your bedroom. So what does the king think the answer is?
Capture him.
What, and how's he going to do that?
He's going to send a big force to capture him because he thinks
Right.
he's more powerful than God.
Right. So it's so silly, right? Like he thinks he's going to surprise the guy, and when he couldn't surprise him all along. And he thinks he's going to use the movement of troops to succeed when the movement of troops has not succeeded over and over again. That's the whole problem he's trying to solve, right? This is the definition of insanity, like doing the same thing and expecting different results. Like, it's very silly, right? This is the tools he has, right? So he's using them because what else is he going to do? Right. So he sends, Dothan is a smaller town. It's about 11 miles from the city of Samaria. So it probably Elisha has been, staying in Dothan and sending a runner back and forth to give his intelligence to the king. We see over and over through this whole section, it's back and forth with the war with Aram, right? It's the war with Aram is on, the war with Aram is off, the war with Aram is on, the war with, and we've got that in this section too, because at the end, the war with Aram is off. None of those soldiers are willing to fight anymore. But in the next story, Samaria is being besieged by Aram. So it's all through here. We see that God is like, he is with his people, but he is also disciplining his people. He is also saying, like, I want you to return to me. Right. And so Elisha is helping the king. Apparently he just voluntarily does so. With this intelligence and sending runners back and forth. So when they surround the city and they're going to capture Elisha, how does the servant feel about that?
Afraid.
Yeah, of course he's afraid, right? He's surrounded by chariots and horsemen. How is Elisha?
He can see what the servant couldn't see.
Right. So this is Linda's great point, is Elisha never seems stressed. Why not?
Because he's got Jesus, he's got God's eyes. I mean, he's able to see.
Yeah,
He has the answer.
Reality. Go ahead.
No, I just said he has the answer to the question.
Yeah. What will we do? Well, we'll trust the Lord who has already won the battle. Right? That's what he says. He says, open his eyes so that he may see. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. So thus, Elisha is, and we have the sense that he has in view the work of God and the reality of God that is not visible with merely human eyes. And it's because of that he is confident and trusting in the Lord, right? We see this, yeah.
Well, I had a question. I cannot remember, when have we heard that before? Open their eyes so that they can see that there are more of us than there are of them. Was that with Elijah? Was that one of the stories with Elijah?
Is that a repeat? I don't think so, although
it seemed like I remembered that, where they I can't remember the story that it goes with, but I thought maybe
there was another besides this one.
Yeah, where when their eyes are opened and they can see that there are all these people, and it's somebody that, like Elijah, that thought he was at the end of his rope and he thought he was the only one left or something like that. That's not Elijah. It's not. Okay.
It was Elijah who said, I'm the only one left. And then God says, I have this many thousand who have not bowed the knee to Baal, whose knees have not bowed him, his lips have not kissed him. And so that is, but this little piece, there may be an echo. There are these passages are so rich with these repetitive echoes, but I don't offhand know of one for that.
I'm going to look and see, because that just seems like I remember that from another story.
Maybe you're thinking of the song. Open mine eyes that I might see visions of truth thou hast for me. Remember that? We used to sing that a long time ago.
Good.
Jesus, that is a great point, because we do, it's easy for us to see the lesson here, isn't it? The battle belongs to the Lord. We sing that song as well, that the battle is already won if we only have eyes to see. And Jesus would say, Let him who has ears to hear, let him hear. Let him who has eyes to see, let him see. So that we know that the work that God is doing is a victory, and that it isn't always visible, but it doesn't mean it's not there. And our confidence is in the Lord. And we have this reversal of blindness going back and forth, right? Those who think they can see have been blind this whole time. They think they can capture God's prophet by the very thing that who's knows what they say, by saying things that he knows what they say, right? Those people then become physically blind and are led into a trap, right? So that, and then their eyes are open so that they can see that they were blind all along.
Yeah.
Here, the servant's eyes are opened so that he can see that he was missing the power of God that is present all around him. And that's the story that we're getting in the history of Israel, that God's power is always there, that he is present for those who seek him, that he is willing to win the battle, that the chariots and horsemen of Israel are just outside our vision and require our trust.
Mhm.
We can depend on God to win that battle for us. A good section of lessons. I like these. Next week, we're going to step in. We're going to go back into politics. We got a lot of these miracle stories. I think they're really compelling, and we could do a lesson on all of them. But next week, we're back into the succession of kings with Jehu and the havoc he wreaks on both Israel and Judah. And so we'll be in chapters 9 through 14 next week. It's all the story of Jehu and all of the stuff he does. He's anointed at the beginning, and then he proceeds to, make his mark. So thank you, everyone.
Are we going to be, is that the same? Is that the original schedule? Are we going to be back on the regular new schedule?
We are, no, it's a revised schedule. So if you search in our emails that we've sent out, it has revised in all caps at the beginning. I can resend it if you want, but March 30th is lesson 9, and then we'll have an April 6th service day. So all of the readings are in the same order. They're broken up the same. They're just, they moved because of the storm cancellation, and we moved service day. So March 30th, lesson 9, April 6th, service day.
Thank you, Deanna.
I'm going to stop the recorder and we can do our prayer time.
Yes.
There we go.
Terry has